Hello, I hope that you are well. And today for Singles Ministry, I want to talk about sadness and depression as a single person, as a single Christian person, should I say. These are things that are going to be very personal. I've gone through these things that I'm going to talk about, and I want to share with you things that I found encouragement in, or stories that I found very encouraging to me. And I think these are things that sometimes the church fails to address. I don't know what kind of church you grew up in, or maybe if you've ever been to church when you were growing up, but I always heard, you can be sad if you love Jesus Christ. It's just joy, joy, joy. Whatever goes through your life, whatever storms, it's joy, joy, joy. And I think it's a good mindset, but it's okay to acknowledge that we get sad, and it's okay to be sad. I think that the Bible tells us it's okay to be sad. And to me, there's a clear difference between sad and being depressed. And I think that nowadays a lot of people play with these words, that mental illness for me is nothing to be played about. It's not to be taken lightly. It's not to be said lightly. So I know a lot of people say stuff like, "Oh, I'm just OCD about this," but you shouldn't say that if you don't actually have OCD. You're supposed to say, "I'm just pedantic about certain things," because I think depression is a very serious thing. And although people, and not people, but it's actually a mental illness, that when you are going through depression, it's a very physical thing. So it's not to be taken lightly. And whenever I think about the difference between sadness and depression, I always think about, when God was bringing all these animals to Adam, and Adam was naming them, and whatever he named them, that's what it became known as. So it's the same thing to me when I think about this. If you're a bit sad and you start saying that you are depressed, you start thinking and believing that you are depressed, the more sad you become, and you might eventually get depression from it. Or sometimes you do just have depression. Obviously, I don't want to be insensitive to that. But yeah, so I think that the Bible tells us that it's okay to be sad, and we have a couple of verses in Ecclesiastes. For example, in 7:2, it says, "It is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting." And in Ecclesiastes 7:3, it says, "Frustration is better than laughter, because a sad face is good for the heart." And I think that these two verses really tell us that sometimes in our time, it's okay to have times that we feel very upset, and it's in our time of sorrow that we reflect about our lives. When someone has passed away, or maybe a dream of yours has died, or maybe I don't know, maybe your spouse has passed away, or maybe the person you thought you're going to get married to passed away. That's the times when, while you're still alive, you reflect about things and you think about your behaviors and your past. And I think sorrow can be a good thing if you don't do well in it, And sorrow leads to wisdom. In Ecclesiastes 7:12 says, "Wisdom is a shelter. Wisdom preserves those who have it." And I think that's what it is, no matter how happy your life has been up to this point, or no matter when, I'm sure you've had, or I hope that you have had happy moments in your life. And throughout all those happy moments, someone has suffered. There's always been a lot of suffering in the world, unfortunately. And I don't think that we suffer because God likes to see his kids suffer and he's there with popcorn checking out like, "Oh, look at this show." God is not like that at all. And it's because, when you go through something hard, when you go through suffering, when you go through sorrow, if that thing doesn't wipe you out, that thing is your point of wisdom. That's something that is supposed to move your heart. It's supposed to make you feel like, "Oh, okay, I've gone through this, and it really sucked for me. I don't want anyone else to go through this. So I'm going to go and I'm going to make sure that no one else suffers from this. Or I'm going to go and change something. I'm going to at least make one person's life better because I've gone through some suffering myself." And that's when you share your testimony and you trying to help someone else going through the things that you have gone through. But it all stems from sorrow, from the suffering. So suffering is supposed to bring you that wisdom. It's supposed to affect the world positively. And and just to say that it's good to acknowledge that sometimes we have good times and sometimes we have bad times. It's okay to be happy. It's okay to be sad. So in Ecclesiastes 7:14, it says, "When times are good, be happy. But when times are bad, consider this: God has made the one as well as the other." And in Ecclesiastes 3:4, it says, there's a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. So it's okay to have different kinds of emotions. And I think that, bringing this to like a single point of view, I think it's very common to be sad or even depressed for being single at whatever age that you are. There's a lot of happy Christian marriages from people who, like, I don't know, got married at age of 18 or something. I don't think that age really matters that much, at least for what I'm talking about right now. That it's okay to be sad that you are alone. I hear this. I hear a lot of pastors say this, and I have a talk about this on YouTube, which is a conversation I had with another Christian friend of mine who is very plugged into the word, and she gave her 2 cents, because I think it's good to bounce off ideas out of someone else, and it's good that when you have moments like this, when you have someone else who can understand and say, actually, I'm going through the same thing, makes you not feel like, oh, okay, I'm not weird. Because a lot of pastors say stuff like, if you're serving the Lord, you don't even notice that you're single, and then you look to the left and bam, the person is there. And it's great. And sometimes you are serving the Lord. Sometimes you are doing everything that God wants you to do, and you still feel sad that you are alone. And Pastor Bianca, I always forget her last name because now she got married to this German guy. They always have like surnames too complicated for me to say. But Pastor Bianca says, serve the house to find a spouse. And I do love that saying. I find it's very funny. But sometimes you are serving the Lord, serving the house for oh so many years, and you still haven't found that spouse. And sometimes people are okay with that. And if you are okay with that, I think it's great. But some other people do get sad or depressed or discouraged in the process. And I think it's okay as well. So in Ecclesiastes 4:10-11 says, but pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? So I think this is perfect to acknowledge that we as human beings, we are social beings. We want to have intimate relationships with someone else. We want to have close relationships with someone else. And I think this acknowledges that, because it's not just, and it's great that we can have a relationship with God. That's fantastic. But I think that sometimes we do, if not all the time, we do miss, or we do want that physical relationship with someone. And I know a lot of people say things like, oh, when I was feeling really sad and I was there in my room crying and praying, I felt God's arms around me. And if you did feel that, I think it's great. I'm not saying that that didn't happen or anything, but I have never felt that. And if you have never felt that, you may also feel like sometimes I wish that God was a physical God that I can go to, even if he wouldn't even if I wouldn't hear him, but I would feel him around me. Because a lot of people shrug this off as like, don't even think about it. I'm going to think about it. I'm a social being. I want to have relationships with people. And even if it's just not a romantic relationship, sometimes you don't even have like a close friend to go to. And you do want that physical touch or physical relationship with someone. And God is still very much a spiritual God. It's very much a spirit that we have a relationship with, and not a physical relationship with. Unless you feel those things, then it's kind of different. But at least for me, God has never felt physical. I've never physically felt that God was there. And I like that the verse is not saying one will never be cold if one has God. No, it says, how can one keep warm alone? So it acknowledges that we physically need someone else there. So it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be depressed that you are single when you desire marriage. So the other thing I wanted to do was to look at some stories in the Bible of guys who were depressed. So I'm looking at Elijah, Job, and Jeremiah. So just a quick reminder of the stories if you don't know. Elijah ran away because he was depressed, that he was alone. He felt very alone in whatever God had called him to do. And Job was a righteous guy, and it was not his fault, but he lost everything he ever had. He physically had like a wife, kids, riches. He lost everything, and he questioned God about this. And Jeremiah was called by God when he was a teenager to preach, and he was even told by God to not have a wife and kids, and all his friends abandoned him when he started preaching the word of God heavily, like obviously trying to shorten this story, so please go read for yourselves. Elijah is in 1 Kings 19, or this particular story, and Job is the whole book. And Jeremiah, we see also is the whole book, but we see that Jeremiah was depressed in 15. So looking at the story of Elijah, I see that, in 1 Kings 19, Elijah was really depressed, and he told God that he wanted to die. And God pretty much said, go back the way you came and go do what I called you to do. Okay, you're not alone. Just keep moving. And in Job, he had all these questions to God, and then when God answered to him, God said, you don't have enough wisdom to ask these questions, really, and you don't have enough wisdom to understand them, even if I did answer them. And God's answer is in Job 38-42. And Jeremiah, like I said, he was telling God how depressed he was. He was cursing the day he was born. And God responded to him in 15:19-21, saying that God was going to sustain him and God was going to be his everything, was going to make him a wall, make him like a fortified wall, and that everything was going to be okay. Now, in these three stories, here's what I don't see God doing. I don't see God going, you're upset. Okay. I do understand. Oh, Elijah, you feel alone. No, I get it. I do. I get it. Or Job, yes, no. I would be just as upset as you are if I lost everything I ever worked for. But I don't see God doing any of that. Or even to Jeremiah, God wasn't like, yeah, I was a bit harsh, right? Like, I don't know, you were a teenager, probably were dreaming about what you're going to call your kids. I don't know, age 13, I already had the names picked up. So I don't know if Jeremiah was like me and he was like, what? I was going to have little Johnny. What are you doing? Yeah. And I don't know if Jeremiah had plans like that. And I don't see God saying, oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I kind of disturbed your plans a little, huh? Yeah, I shouldn't have done that. And like, to me, this is just me, my selfish nature. I wanted to that God responded like this, because I wanted to open my Bible and see that those people depressed for being lonely, and God was like, yes, I completely understand. Yeah, put your head here on my shoulder and let's cry together. And I don't see that, and so it makes me a little bit like, oh God, that was a bit insensitive. But this is what I do see. I see God giving them instructions to carry on, at least not so much with Job, but to Elijah, like I said, God said, get up, go. And to Jeremiah, God said, just keep preaching my word. Just keep saying the good stuff I'm telling you. And this is why I think that this is because no matter how depressed you are, and I'm going to try to convey this the best way I can, because I've gone through that. I've gone through like days where I literally cry all the way to church and then wipe up my tears and then get there and I'm like, I'm good and everything is fine, or like, I'm okay, I'm surviving just fine. And so I think that God was acting like this because he doesn't want us to dwell in our sadness, but also because the most important thing for us to understand about our lives and the things that we go through is that this is not supposed to wipe you out. No matter how hard it gets, that you are supposed to get up and go. It will feel like it's against the current, and it's going to be the hardest thing you ever do when you go through moments like this sometimes. But this is not supposed to wipe you out because Jesus overcame the world. And so this is not going to be the death of you. This is not going to be the death of your destiny or of your God's calling in your life, because you have the strength inside of you to pull yourself out of that funk, out of that depression, out of not wanting to get out of bed and go serve the Lord. And I know it's going to be the hardest thing, but it's something that you have to do, because this is what God is answering to everyone, to these guys who were depressed in the Bible. You need to carry on doing what I called you to do, because I've got the wisdom that you don't have. So I know this. So just trust me. Just do all you can. Get up and keep going. Yeah, that's what I wanted to share. I know this is such a sensitive message, and I wanted to make sure that I was just as sensitive, but also wanted to impart what I've gone through, in the hopes that maybe it will help you, or maybe you can share with someone else, because our lives are not our own. And if you've gone through something just as harsh, some very deep suffering, that you're able to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to share my story with someone else. I'm not going to hide this and hold the wisdom that I got from this to myself. So yeah, I hope that this was encouraging to you. And yeah, just if you are really sad or depressed for whatever reason, even if you're not, because it's not because you're single or anything, just keep praying, keep believing, because one thing that God did do in all those cases, God did respond. There was never anyone in the Bible who cried out to God that we read that God never came for them. God always, always answers. So yeah, just keep believing for that, and I'll see you in the next videos.